All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm excited about starting the study. I always say I'm excited about it. We'll see if you guys are as well. We're looking this evening at Ezekiel 10 and 11. Believe it or not, we are a quarter of the way through the book already. It seems kind of odd just to sort of think that way. It seems like we were working on this and getting ready for it for a long time, and then we're already not most of the way through, but we're a good chunk of the way through. 3 quarters left to go. We've made it so far, and we've survived somewhat. Like I said last week, we've had a bit of attrition on Wednesday night, but that may be due to other factors than the subject. The 10 and 11 really is the second half of 8 and 9. The titles, man, someone,
There's a loose baby.
No, what's the expression? Those who live in glass houses? Man. Let that young'un make all the noise he wants. All right, he's fine.
Didn't even notice it, did you?
Didn't even faze me. It was like wasn't the right pitch of kid. But the titles from last week and this week go together, and that's because 8, 9, 10, and 11 really is one long continuous vision. Ezekiel begins the vision at the beginning of chapter 8. He concludes it at the end of chapter 11, and everything in the middle sort of goes together. But rather than have a 3-hour class, we're breaking it up in this way. So God is going away, and this time he's going away for good, in the sense that he was in Israel before. The temple will never look the same. Nothing will ever be the same after 586, when Babylon destroys everything. And we get representations of that in this vision. Okay, Babylon's not mentioned by name, but the effects of what happens is shown. The first 8 verses of chapter 10, you remember when God arrives there at the temple in his throne chariot, he looks about, he sees these things, he drags Ezekiel through these 4 stages. Look how awful everything is. He calls in the 7 men, 6 executioners, and a guy with a writing case. We called him the scribe last week because that's kind of what scribes do. The 6 are sent out to destroy. The scribe is sent out to mark all the faithful. He returns and he basically says, I'm done with that. And that's kind of where we left off last week. The first 8 verses, the scribe's given another job. He is told to go underneath the throne chariot of God, underneath where there is fire, somehow underneath, between the wheels and the cherubim, directly underneath the platform, there's some kind of fire source. He tells the man, go underneath, retrieve that fire, and then use it on the city. Scatter the coals on the city. The word for scatter is actually the same as the word for sprinkle, which is an interesting parallel. We'll talk more about that, hopefully. Once that happens, we get this re-description of the wheels and of the cherubim. Most of the description is the same, but not all of it. There are some more details, and there's some overlap between those details that is interesting. If you read closely, verse 12 seems to say that the cherubim also have eyes, not just the wheels. And that's kind of an odd thing. The wheels are given a specific name. The wheels themselves in verse 14 seem to have faces on them. You remember from chapter 1, it was the cherubim who had 4 faces. Now the wheels have faces. And one of the faces that the wheels have is the cherub instead of the eye. I mean, if it's confusing, I think it's supposed to be. Or at least that's the truth of what's going on. Anyway, most of it's the same. And that's kind of the important point here. In the middle of this 9 to 22, you have this brief sort of side comment. When Scripture stops one thing and starts doing something else, you want to notice and catch that on the way by. In the middle of this description of the thing from chapter 1, 18, 19, and 20, what does the glory do? How does it move?
Leaves the house and goes over the cherubim.
It's leaving.
Yes.
And it's going from basically the steps of the temple to the east gate.
Correct.
The east gate would have been considered the front door. Because as the temple, if you were looking at it, the temple faces this way. The east gate is the one on this end. So it's literally the front door or the front entrance to the inner court. And there's one on the north and there's one on the south. The front door is the one he's coming in. The glory is moving and not in the direction you expect it. We're going to talk a little bit about that too and why that's significant. In chapter 11, Ezekiel begins to prophesy against Jerusalem's wicked princes, or the people basically who've been left over, who are in charge, because someone's always going to be in charge, right? And his message to them is not one of comfort. The book concludes, or rather, the chapter concludes in 14, or not the conclusion, but in 14 to 21, you get probably the most positive section we've read so far. Once the judgment passages start in chapter 4, there's really not a whole lot of hope anywhere to be found, and then you get some right here. 14 through 21 is beautiful, it's profound, and it's also, God says some things here that are going to bother Jews for centuries. He says some things here that they simply will not accept, according to their own admission. We're going to talk closely about that, hopefully, too. And then at the end, God departs Jerusalem. He takes up some kind of position on the east side of the city, on a mountain. The vision ends, and then Ezekiel tells the people who were there listening kind of what happened. You remember in chapter 8, he was with the elders of Israel. They were sitting before him. He starts having this vision. Well, when it's over, he starts telling it to them, and I'm assuming to everyone else too. Okay, that's the quick, fast summary of what you saw. We're going to get more into the details. What did you notice first of all? What did you see that was interesting or different or odd or something you thought was significant? All right.
I have a question, really.
Bob's first, but I'm going to need more help from others. All right.
Yeah. It's really more of a question, because you said God tells him to go get the fire from underneath the cherubim around the wheels and so on and so forth. But it's interesting because the cherubim actually reaches in and hands it to him.
Mm-hmm.
Is that significant?
I'm not sure what to do with it, honestly. He goes to retrieve it, and it's the cherubim who reaches under and grabs it and gives it to him, almost like he's not allowed.
Right, like it's
Maybe there's
placed too far, like it's, he's not authorized to do it, but God told him to do it, which is a little bit confusing.
Go get it, and when he gets there, the cherubim was like, okay, here.
And hands it to him. Okay.
I don't know specifically what to do with it.
Okay, and I couldn't find anybody that said anything really necessarily about it. I just thought it was interesting because it made me think of Nadab and Abihu. You think of strange fire. So it's almost like he wasn't authorized to reach under there and grab it. So he's
Fair
given
point.
it to prevent him from doing something incorrectly.
I can see that. Something along the lines of the cherubim's the only one allowed to do anything with the structure that God's writing on at that point.
I don't know, pure speculation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know what to do with it. What else did you notice, did you see in the two chapters? What did you find interesting? Yes, ma'am.
What is the significance of the fire being used to burn the city this way?
Okay. I think that she asked what was the significance of using the fire on the city. In 586, when the Babylonians show up for the final time, that's what they do to the city. They burn Jerusalem to the ground. Burn the temple, they burn everything.
I was wondering that in the fire, the way they do it, instead of setting wood on fire.
There is something to be said from where the fire comes from. So if God says, go get some of my fire and sprinkle it on the city, who's the one really destroying Jerusalem?
God's.
God, right? Babylon's the tool. They're going to be the instrument, the weapon in the hand. But God's the one doing it. And I think that's where the source of the fire is important for this, right? God's the one that's going to purify, or he's going to sprinkle the city with fire, not with water or blood. And that's an important idea too. Awesome, I like that. What else did you notice in 10 and 11? Something was odd or weird or interesting question, something neat? It's a good chapter, yeah. 2 chapters.
I guess there's obviously a lot of questions. I have more questions than I have comments.
Questions are great.
At the same time, the obvious, the cloud filled the temple at the beginning of these chapters, and it moves east. Maybe you don't know why it went east, but it went to the east gate, and then it went further east outside. I mean, it is obvious what he means. And so even for those, and I know that's the application for those there, you can't miss the significance of God leaving you. There, like I said, so many questions, but like that was just too hard to miss.
if there's nothing else from 8 to 11 that you catch, it's this. God brings Ezekiel in that sort of that courtroom, Exhibit A, Exhibit B. He says, I've had it, and then he leaves. That's the big point of the whole thing. In terms of why did he go east, who else went east when they left Jerusalem? The exiles. In a sense, God's moving toward his people. Maybe. That might be something to do with that. All right? Other thoughts or thought? Julie, do you have a thought? I know you have a thought. No?
One of the things I'm struck with consistently, and I think it's so important for us to remember, is God is reminding Ezekiel constantly that this is righteous judgment.
Yes.
This is absolutely righteous judgment. We see that throughout. We see the feeling of it, even if it's not stated. It's like, I'm a patient God. I'm a long-suffering God. But I'm not patient and long-suffering anymore with these people. And we consistently see that. And I think that's so important. And I know that's something we'll talk about later when we say, what did it mean to them? But it strikes me as I read this.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Along with that thought, the other thing that is so striking, God's he's going to destroy Jerusalem, but yet he's talking about 70 years bringing them back. And they're going to come back as a different people, more certain. That kind of forgiveness is just
Hard to fathom.
overwhelming.
It's hard to fathom that God would exile a people and then not abandon them.
He's talking about destroying them because of what they've done. At the same time, he's talking about bringing them back 70 years from now. What kind of love and forgiveness is that?
It's not the kind we think about all that often, or often enough. That God would feel that way. Just a few things. I'm going to mention these in passing, and then we're going to get more to the what should they have done with it, and what can we do with it. Like we talked about a moment ago, the fire comes from God to destroy the city. The executioners come at God's behest to judge the city. God leaves the city. God's the one doing all these things. Babylon is the instrument. He's going to use Babylon to accomplish all of these things. Okay, they're the ones, 2 Kings 25, they're the ones that raise the city. Okay, and they're the ones that carry that out. One thing to notice, there's a lot of repetition from chapter 1. When Ezekiel goes about describing the wheels and the cherubim, while there are some differences, they're minor. And he describes what he sees in the same language and in clearer language in a lot of cases. It's in this section where he actually identifies who's on the throne at all. In chapter 1, he doesn't. We know who it is from context, but in this section, he actually says the God of Israel is the one, departing and going here and yonder. So there's some repetition, but then there's some clarification too. The two most famous instances of God's glory filling a dwelling are, in order, what's the first one? The first time God entered any sort of dwelling and filled it was Exodus 40. Israelites get done building this thing. The tabernacle. When the tabernacle is completed at the end of Exodus 40, and it says that Moses carried out all these things, but he's the leader, right? A lot of people did it. They get it completed, they get everything set, and then at the end of Exodus 40, God's glory enters and fills the tabernacle such that they can't stand to be near it, right? So that's the first big time. The second one is what? Solomon's temple, right? What is it? 1 Kings chapter 8. Same language is used. The glory comes in, they can't stand to be there. What you have in this section is the opposite. The glory shows up. Does the glory ever go inside the temple proper in Ezekiel 8, 9, 10, and 11? Like inside the actual house? No.
No, it's the
No.
threshold.
It should chill us. Think of what it would do to an Israelite. God arrives to his city, to his tabernacle, or to his temple, and gets to the front door and goes, nope. Not after everything I've seen. And then in the first time in their history, it's depicted that he turns and he walks the other way and leaves. This is how significant this event is, right? For an Israelite, these are the two greatest things to happen in your history, other than being delivered from Egyptian bondage. God arriving in the tabernacle and God arriving in the temple. In this section, God's leaving. And he's leaving as he said he would if they forsook him, right? Don't miss the movement. God gets to the threshold, he gets to the gate, then he goes to the mountain east of Jerusalem. Clearly, if you connect the dots, he's leaving. Right? Yes, sir.
You mentioned this earlier, and I wondered about it as I read. Is it almost like he's sadly leaving? I mean, I know we don't know, but it feels like it's so reluctant, but
Yeah.
it's like in stages almost.
Yeah. Why would the God who can show up anywhere instantaneously take his time? He's making a point, right? I'm leaving. And he shows that that's the case by being in those three places. I'm going to submit to you that I don't think Ezekiel fully understands everything he's seeing yet. And maybe he never will. He sees the likeness or the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. He sees it twice now. There's more detail, but the detail seems confusing. Because in chapter 1, the wheels had eyes, and in chapter 10, the cherubim have eyes. And then the wheels have faces, and it's almost like someone seeing the same confusing thing over again and trying to make sense of it, and it still isn't quite there. It almost looks like the wheels and the cherubim are kind of one thing somehow. I don't know how it works. I didn't see it. But his explanation of it gives you the impression that he's still trying to process. Some things are clear. He knows who's on the throne. Yes, sir.
Well, that was the thing in the first chapter. One of those was an ox, not a cherubim, but
Exactly.
it's a cherubim and not an ox. And I was just curious.
Why there's a difference. And I think, my opinion, right, I'm never going to, this is my opinion. I think he's still trying to make sense of it. He's still trying to make sense of the thing he's seeing. And, how can you make sense of seeing God, in essence, right, in some representation? Now, in 10 and verse 2, I've mentioned this a couple times already. Most English translations, the word is scatter. He's told to take the coals and scatter them over the city. The word is zarak. It's the same word for sprinkle in Hebrew. Sprinkle is the word used for what they did with the blood when they would do the atonement and sanctify things, right? They would sprinkle blood here and there. And it was always the sense of it being an atonement or a cleansing when that's going on.
Purification.
Purification, exactly right. Why would God be setting about to purify Jerusalem with fire?
Because it needed it.
This is what you do with situations that are too bad to save, right? You just burn it down and start over, like a field full of weeds, right? At some point, you have to burn the place. And that's what he's doing. And I think I think there should be a hint of that when we go through there. I noted this last week. Ezekiel intervenes 2 times, or intercedes 2 times. In chapter 9, he says, are you destroying the remnant of Israel by pouring out your wrath on Jerusalem? You remember God's answer, it's not favorable. God says in chapter 9, I'm destroying Jerusalem. This place is over. When he rephrases the intercession in chapter 11, it's a little different. He doesn't mention Jerusalem the second time. He asks about the remnant again, but in 11 and verse 13, he says, will you bring the remnant of Israel to a complete end, not Jerusalem? Now, what's God's answer to the second one? Is he bringing the remnant to an end? No, he's not. Which is why he spends 14 from 21 explaining, I'm going to be a sanctuary to them, I'm bringing them back, I'm restoring them, all those things, right? So you get 2 intercessions with 2 different answers. Are you destroying the whole remnant by pouring your wrath on Jerusalem? He says, I'm destroying Jerusalem. But the second time he says, no, I'm not destroying the remnant. It's the biggest sign of hope we've seen so far. A little bit of repetition in the section. Ezekiel says 3 times, this is the thing I saw in the Kibar Canal. Right? He's identifying that the thing he saw in chapter 1 is the same as what he saw here. He identifies the God of Israel. I said that. Now, the princes. In chapter 11, there are these men who are kind of outside the city that God judges, and he says that they filled the city with the slain. Who are these folks? To the best I can find out, they are the ones left over after Ezekiel's exile. In that second exile, the leadership of Israel is taken, right? The king's taken, all the people with the king are taken too. Someone takes over in their absence, right? They're not just not going to have leadership at all. These folks that are left over, one person called them political opportunists, which I think may be a good way of putting it. And what did they do in the absence? What did they do between Ezekiel's exile and 586? Well, they weren't holy. They were, as God says, filling the city with the slain. They were wicked men. They were taking lands and houses of folks. Think about this dynamic. A big group of your population gets hauled off to captivity. What happens to all their stuff? All their houses and fields and so forth. Someone's going to come get it. They would have taken the precious stuff, right? But what about the houses and the lands and whatnot that just left over? Somebody has to take ownership. Right? Can you imagine the land rush that went on? Oh, so-and-so went to Babylon. Well, I'll take their stuff, right? And I'll take this, and I'll take this. You got these people left over that are doing that, and God doesn't judge them favorably. Well, yes, sir.
That's another thing that would have been against God's will, because specific land was given to specific tribes and people.
Exactly. The exile is not cause for greed, and for going over the tribe allotments. One of the men's identified as Pelatiah, the son of Benaiah. Remember in the Old Testament specifically, the names mean something, right? They don't mean anything to us because we don't speak Hebrew. If we spoke Hebrew, we would understand that Pelatiah is Yahweh has delivered. Benaiah is, get away. This thing wants me to update. I don't want to update. Pelatiah is Yahweh has delivered. Benaiah is Yahweh has built up. It's that guy that when God gets done talking, immediately dies on the spot. What's the point? That guy is the one that immediately, done. Is God going to deliver? No. Is God building up at the moment? No. Right? There's another name in this section that's important too. Look in chapter 11. It's somewhere early. Jaazaniah, the son of Azur. There's a Jaazaniah mentioned in 2 Kings 25, but this is a different guy. Jaazaniah means Yahweh listens. Is God listening to them? No. The son of Azur. Azur means the helper. Is God helping them? No. The names mean something, right? And the fact that the guy named Yahweh is delivered and Yahweh is built up dies immediately means something. There's significance to that, and also with the name of the other guy. The princes thought they were the meat in the pot. I don't like how the ESV puts this. It calls it meat in the cauldron. The problem is cauldron's a different word in the original. Pot's the better word for it. If you have that, you're better off. It's not like, meat in the crock pot or meat on the stove cooking. Well, we're safe. Well, that doesn't sound safe, right? That sounds like you're being cooked to death. Meat in the pot here is closer to like being in a mason jar or being in a storage vessel, right? Think about if you're the peaches in the mason jar. Nothing can hurt us in here, right? We're safe. We're secure. Nothing's wrong. What do you do with expired food in a mason jar? Dump it out, right? You pull the ring, crack the lid, and you get rid of all that corruption that's inside the city or inside the jar. Now, look at chapter 11 again. They look at each other and say, we're safe, like meat in a mason jar. And God says, no, you're ruined and spoiled and rotten. And so I'm going to take you. The text says, I'm going to bring you out of it. Right? I'm literally I'm dumping you out. Because they're corrupt. Because, as it says, they filled the city with the slain. Right? A good way to think about that. God says here specifically, I will judge you at the border of Israel. That happens in 2 Kings 25. The leftover leadership that is hauled away from Jerusalem at 586, the Babylonians stop at basically the northern border, murder all of them, and then keep going. So the thing God says would happen in chapter 11 actually does happen in 2 Kings 25. Okay, you can see that too. This might be the best line in the entire 2 chapters. This right here. There's some good ones. This might be the best. When Ezekiel says, "Are you destroying the remnant?" God says something significant. He says, "Son of man, your brothers, your relatives, your fellow exiles, and the whole house of Israel, all of them, are those to whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, 'Go far from the Lord, this land's given us.'" What's God saying? Ezekiel's worried about the people in Jerusalem. So how does God respond? Those folks in Jerusalem, not Israelites. The guys you're in exile with, they are Israelites. They are my people. That should comfort the exiles, and at the same time, it should be the most chilling thing you've seen God say in a long time. Ezekiel's worried about these folks in Jerusalem. And God says, listen, your relatives, your brothers, my people, they're the exiles, not the people in Jerusalem. That is a stunning thing to say. The folks to whom the people in Jerusalem, and now think about how they would have said. The people in Jerusalem must think, well, we must be doing okay. We've been left here. We must be the good ones, and the exiles must be the bad ones. And God's saying, no, the exiles are my people. I took them out, and after I'd taken them out, I'm wiping the rest of you off. Right? That I can't overstate how important that specific phrase is or passage is. In 14 to 21, God promises Israel a new hope, and he promises them a new series of things. Well, I picked up the wrong one. In 11 and verse 16, read that with me, if you will. 11 and verse 16 in the ESV, it says, "I have been a sanctuary to them." The word sanctuary is the word often used of the tabernacle and more often used of the temple. Mikdash in Hebrew, right? The sanctuary. Why is that significant? God says, I have been a temple to them. Where? Where has God been a temple to them?
Wherever they are.
Exile. You imagine telling an Israelite, oh, the temple you have in Jerusalem, that's not the temple. God's been the temple with them and with his people. That thought bothered the Jews and bothers the Jews. It has bothered them for centuries. The fact that God would say, I've been their tabernacle or I've been their temple in exile. I'll give you an example. In the Jewish commentary on the Old Testament, the Targum, the Midrash is part of that. When they would paraphrase this passage and they would say this, because I scattered them in the countries, therefore I have given them synagogues second only to my holy temple. They read the passage and said, oh, well, God must be talking about the synagogues because he can't possibly be talking about the temple. Not in a foreign land. But that's exactly what God's saying. I have been their sanctuary, their protection, their dwelling place, even in exile. Right? That line specifically has bothered them for a long, long time. God promised them a new Exodus. He says, I'm bringing them back. Just like he brought them there in the first place. In the following verse, I'm bringing them to a new land of sorts. Not a different geographical place, but a land very different from the one they were in the first time. A land that's been cleansed of all its unholiness, all of their unholiness. I'm bringing them back to a new land. I'm going to re-enter my covenant with them. The old covenant, they've shattered it just like Moses shattered the plates. I'm redoing my covenant. And I'm going to judge the wicked again. It's a vast reset. It's a restart that God promises to do for his people. All right. Man, time flies when you're having fun. what did this mean to them first, right? That's always the big question we ask when we want to think about meaning is, what did it mean to them first? Because it was written to them first, not to us. The first big thing I think we have to get is this. The Jews needed to be able to understand what God's doing to Jerusalem is different from what he's doing to the exiles. Right? There's a sense in which they want to lump all together. Either we're all cursed or we're all... That's not really the case. And you can see that in Ezekiel's 2 intercessions. The first time he asks about Jerusalem, and God kind of shakes his head no and says, that place is gone. The second time, though, there's the new Exodus, the people coming back, the new covenant, all those good things, right? And the exiles needed to understand that. When God destroys Jerusalem, it is an indictment on the people they have been, but it's not a sign of what he's going to do for them going forward. Does that make sense? Going forward, things are going to be different. And I'm going to take care of, God says he's going to take care of them. All right, be a sanctuary to them, and so on. He's abandoning the land, but he's not abandoning Israel. Which is a big point you want to make. Who are God's people? If they're not the people that live in Jerusalem, who are they then? Right? That's an important definition to make. So who are God's people, according to God?
Those that do his will.
Faithful. The faithful are God's people. Not necessarily those who live in Jerusalem. In fact, not at all those who live in Jerusalem. And it's a fact that the New Testament's going to build on, isn't it? Remember how Paul puts it in Romans 2? A Jew is one inwardly. He's going to say, if somebody who's a Gentile keeps the law, is he not counted as one of God's people? Right? This is a huge thing to understand. God's people are the faithful. They're not necessarily the blood descendants of Abraham. Right. Yes?
We had one scene where there were people weeping because of what was going on in God's temple. Those are the ones that were marked and were saved.
Exactly. Then there's your distinguishing mark. Not pun intended, but the ones who sigh and moan over the wickedness, those are my folks. The rest, they're not my people. Which is, again, for an Israelite, understand how important that is. They've taken so much pride in being blood relatives of Abraham and in line of the covenant, and God says that's not really the point of this. The point of this is faithfulness to me and to my covenant. If you're going to restart the relationship, you've got to restart with the heart. There's an interesting phrase. It's dual-heartedness, basically. It's the idea that you say one thing and you do something else. You claim to be one thing and you're not that thing. You're actually another thing. A hypocrite, the same idea. Of course, Jesus would upbraid the hypocrites in the New Testament, the Pharisees. You remember Matthew 23, I believe it is. If you're going to restart the relationship with God, it has to begin here. It's not about being back home. It's not about being in the right temple and all that. It's about what happens within. Right? Paul would say in Romans 2, a Jew is one inwardly. It's a matter of the spirit, not of the letter. Right? The end of Romans 2. Think about the people left in Jerusalem. God said, and I'm going to back up to this real quick. The people in Jerusalem were the ones that said, you all go away from us because God has given us the land. Now, what's the lesson for the exiles? Those people were foolish, right? They were looking around going, hey, we've been left behind. We must be doing okay. Just if someone else is suffering, don't assume it's because you're in the right over this. The exiles were suffering, sure, but that didn't mean the inhabitants were fine. All right, don't take someone else's suffering as a sign that you're doing well, right? Because the Jews fell for that. Yes?
I was trying to find a verse along with what you were saying about, the faithful as far as God is concerned. And in 11:19, he's talking, he's going to give them a different heart. They're going to be one that will worship him from the heart.
New heart. Passage that's really big later, right? Ezekiel 34, I believe. Yeah.
To your point up there, ironically, when we see conquerors and they take the people in waves, what do? They take the most valuable people to them and they leave the dregs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the dregs that have been left behind in Jerusalem. I mean, that's not nice to say about people. I'm not trying to
Right.
demean anybody. But these are the people that had no value to the Babylonians, they didn't see, and so on and so forth. And these are the ones that have gotten so full of themselves because they've been left alone.
Not being important enough to be an exile doesn't mean you're wicked, right?
No,
But the ones that were left looked at each other and said, well, hey, we must be doing okay because they were all wicked. They got hauled off. We're left here in the promised land. And God's like, I took my people and left. The rest of y'all are going to get it. The guys that were in charge in Jerusalem between exile and destruction, the Bible says they filled the city with the slain. God's not okay when you mess with vulnerable people, when you steal land that's not yours, when you take advantage when the opportunity presents itself. That doesn't go unanswered. That's a lesson for Israel and obviously one for us too. I saw, yes.
Well, back to this, I'm sorry, I'm still on
No,
this
no.
faithfulness.
I understand.
And I thought about David when he had sinned with Bathsheba in verse 51, verse 16, for you do not desire sacrifice, or I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifice is of a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart.
What's he worried about? He's worried about the heart. Absolutely. One more. The people in Jerusalem obviously believed they were safe, and that didn't count for anything when the time came. Right? What they felt and what was actually the case were two different things. I mean, and that's an important lesson for any people at any age, but I mean, obviously for us as well. They looked at one another and says, "Hey, we're the meat in the pot." God says, "Yeah, you are, and you're rotten, and I'm dumping you out." Right? Just because they thought they were fine didn't mean they were fine. Right? I've heard someone say, facts don't care about your feelings. The fact of their wickedness and the fact of God going to destroy the city didn't change a lick when they thought they were safe. And it's important for us to remember that too. All right, application stuff. With applications, we always take what they should have learned and make those apply to us as well, which you can see obviously a lot of those that we just talked about, direct parallels, right, to things we've been told. But in this section, we also look at connections to Jesus. These are, in fact, some of my favorite things to bring out because the Old Testament points to Christ, and so you want to get a chance to bring that out. God says, I've been a sanctuary to them. Did Jesus ever call himself a temple? Jesus says in John 2, destroy this temple. In 3 days I will raise it up. And it's a little thin, okay? He uses the same, sort of word. It's not exactly the same, it's close. But I find it interesting that in Ezekiel 11, God says, I've been a sanctuary to them. And then a little bit later, Jesus says of himself that I'm a temple to them. He says something also that it's not the word temple, but the thought behind it is identical. John chapter 10 and verse 27. Remember, God said to the exiles, I have been a sanctuary to them in the place where they are. I've protected them, and one day I'm bringing them back. In John 10 and verse 27, Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give eternal life to them, and they shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. In John 10, Jesus doesn't say specifically, I've been a sanctuary to them, but that's what's described there. The concept of God protecting his people and being with them where they are was something that really was kind of the point of Jesus being here. Right? Jesus came to live among us and to protect us. Jesus taught his followers to ignore the religiously and politically powerful. In the case of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? Matthew 16, ignore the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Just because they thought they were fine didn't change the fact that they weren't at all. God says to the inhabitants who think they're safe in the city like meat in the pot, God says, I'm bringing you out. I'm taking you out of here. I'm dumping you out. Jesus described judgment in the same language of folks being cast into outer darkness. Right? They thought they were safe. No, they're being thrown out of that safety. Jesus uses the same language to describe judgment. Now think about this one. God was betrayed by Israel and left out the east gate of the city, and he landed on a mountain on the east side of the city. Right? Jesus was betrayed by one of his closest friends, disciples. And the night he was betrayed, where did he go? He left Jerusalem and went to a mountain. What's the song? On a hill out? No, that's the wrong hill, but he goes to Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives, which is the first mountain east of the city of Jerusalem. Isn't it interesting? God leaves the city and lands on a mountain east of Jerusalem, and so does Jesus. Right? At the very moment when he was betrayed. God says in 11 and verse 5 that he knew what the princes were thinking. Repeatedly in the Gospels it says that Jesus knew what people were thinking around him. Right? He knew their thoughts, it says again and again. All right, the folks that were with him. Those are neat. Okay, I love those when you get to see that. Sorry, we're short on time. The lesson of God's people not being connected to a land or a nation still applies. God's people are not only in the United States. They're wherever there are faithful people. Period. Right? And are they faithful? That's the question, not where are they. God's people are faithful to him and to his covenant. I've mentioned this line already from Romans chapter 2. If you're going to renew relationship with God, it has to start at the heart. Right? God knows the heart. Hebrews 4, all things are laid and open to him who sees the heart. It says they're open and bare the eyes of him. When James talks about it, he talks about those who expect to ask God something but they don't ask in faith. Those people are double-minded, not single-minded. Right? God wants single-minded devotion. What did Jesus say about God and mammon in Matthew chapter 6? You can't do both. You can't be with both of these at the same time. You either hate one and love the other, or love the one and despise the other. Right? You got to be single-minded when it comes to God. When someone else is suffering or being punished, don't assume it's because you've been chosen over them. Right? It's so tempting. Can I finish my thought? It's so tempting to see other people suffering and think, oh, well, they're suffering, I must be great. No. It may not be your turn yet. Right? Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. It seems likely to me that it wasn't a piece of cake in Jerusalem either.
No.
I mean,
No.
these waves of exiles have left. The nation was destroyed. It wasn't destroyed in a pretty easy, simple fashion. I mean, the city was more crumbled than standing, right? So it's not like it was cakewalk there. I think it's important to remember there was trial and testing in both of those locations, both among the exiles, but also back in Israel. I think if God had found more faithful still in Jerusalem, he would have exiled more before he destroyed Jerusalem, right? So I think it's important to realize there was testing and trials both places. And while he did at that time, there was a physical remnant of faithful people left, and they were all outside the land. The sanctuary that he is, it's spiritual and not physical.
Right.
And so the sanctuary wasn't tied to a physical place or even physical protection. And that's the same for us. It's not about, the faithful are going to be those who are physically protected to be here the longest. That's not how it works, right? His being a sanctuary for us, it's about spiritual protection. If we go to him for that, it's not about physical protection. And I think that what you see is that God's people are the few, the faithful. That's the same as today. It's not the many, the blood relatives, the descendants. Or today you would say it's not the many who claim, right? It's the few and the faithful.
Isn't it, I love the point. Isn't it tempting to take when things are going well in our prosperity and think, well we're being protected. Right? we assume that's the sanctuary that's being talked about, when it's not. As you mentioned, it's exactly spiritual. If God cared about vulnerable people being mistreated then, he hasn't changed his mind, right? Pure religion undefiled before God is this, right? Care for the orphan and widows in their affliction. He still cares about those people. If we've stopped caring about them, we're on the wrong side of things. We talk about this too. Intent and belief are not the same as obedience there. One final thing, and I'll be done. God talks about giving them a new heart. What was going to be the thing that gives them a new heart? Love it.
No idolatry.
God would do one thing that would crack the heart and expose something faithful and living underneath it. What was it? One act that would accomplish this.
Destruction of
Crucifixion, guys. Think about it. What's the one thing that changes everything about Israel? It wasn't coming back necessarily. It was God sending his son as the Messiah. That's the thing. That's the thing that shifts and changes the heart, ultimately. Anyway. Hi. You look related to me. All right. Oh, there's so much stuff here. 12 and 13, Lord willing, we'll talk about next week. All right? Appreciate you guys, your comments.